that it helps maintain and increase identity and self-awareness, right? You are no longer burdened to what a doctor told you, someone who has advanced knowledge that you don't understand. You are burdened to what you understand about yourself, and therefore, if something spikes in the future, you have the capacity internally to be able to fix and change it should it come forward. And what I'll leave you with is the idea that like moving the needle even 1% for someone who A, doesn't have access to medical attention, or B, does and is paying a lot of money out of pocket for it, moving the needle even just 1% for that person who is looking for some sort of escape, looking for some sort of way to understand what can be burdening to them, is enough to subscribe and to agree that the rise of the transdiagnostic approach is beneficial. Thank you. Sorry, let me start.
Mental health is not a symptom, it's not a spectrum, it's a very terrifying disease that has been studied by countless research, scientific study, and explain that these do have not just mental effect on you, but largely biological effect on how your neuroscience, how your brain function, particular of you that perceive happiness, particular of you that release the chemistry that make you feel different thing, called disorder. And that's the thing that they are missing. I think the fourth thing that PM trying to attempt is to tell that, you know what, this is simply a makeup, this is simply a substitute for what we do not have. Here are a few quick responses. The fourth thing here, I say, will say that unqualified substitute is worse than any possible thing. The fourth thing they came is to say that you got free therapy. I don't see that why free therapy is something good. Know that no professional therapist or professional doctor will actually consult free service to you. Most of the time, it's just like, for instance, volunteers who receive or pick up hotline. Why this is something that's so bad? I think the fourth thing here is that people, when they call an anti-approach for therapy, they want recognition, they want empathy, they want proof of that. I don't think people have the fear to simply say that, you know what, this will be all expert that simply process away. The moment that you fail to receive that particular message from the one that you are seeking help for, people who call this probably already calling their friends, their family, they do not have a good alternative. The moment that they call this, they get disappointed and this causes furthermore much mental issue. But we're happy to extend to the situation why even if this risk commercially gives you something that negatively. I think the second thing, how exactly the risk start and how exactly the risk is problematic. I think the risk start, as they say, that a few perspectives. The first thing is in the structural law. You are seeing that more trending video as like how it's self-reflective, how it's not really a big issue, it's really about the spectrum of the issue, about your mental cost, your childhood, your traumatization, and these are things that are good for you. I think the second also looks like, for instance, people approach therapists more. They use talk therapy to go through the particular examination instead of going to professional psychiatry to examine what's happened on their perspective. Why this is something that problematic? Several things. The fourth thing here is that we simply believe that this makes people diagnose their mental disease way much later and way much harder. Why this is the case? A few things. The fourth thing here is that the society generally has stigmatization to mental disease. People most of the time do not want to recognize that they do have a mental disease. But also a second thing, right? Most of therapy, professional therapy are also equally expensive. Most of the time therapists don't want to ask you to go to psychiatry, but they know that after you go in to take the pill, it actively reduces the cost, it actively reduces the effectiveness of them having that particular conversation on that particularly. But also the last thing, this is also a lot of time. Yes, the pill, yes.
Sure. Mental health is entirely biological. Gut check that for a second. Somebody who just came back from war and has PTSD, how is that a precondition? How is that biological?
Yes, of course, you will have biological situation. Yeah, you are PTSD, therefore you heard the sound of fire or the sound of crack. Your body uncontrollably shake over the situation. This is not something that you can individually erase the memory and say, you know what, let's bye Vietnam War. Now I'm going to repicture it into a beach traveling of the Hawaii. That's not what happened with that. You cannot replace the California sunshine to the Vietnam War memory traumatization that you have. But I'm going to move on to the further situation. Explain it. This is the situation that you haunted. What I'm going to explain are several things. The fourth thing here is that how exactly our counter model work. Second, why they assign significant harms to you. Thirdly, from both individual perspective and social perspective. The fourth thing here is that how our side operates. I think the fourth thing here is that we also got different severity diagnosis. For instance, there are diagnoses see that if you are mild depression, if you are serious depression in this particular cases, this also actually affect the treatment that you are going to get. For instance, in situations that mild depression, most of doctors will not suggest you taking heavy medicine in this particular cases because this is actually factually negative for your health. A lot of time, this is likely that they will suggest you to operate into the talk therapy in these cases by professional psychiatry. But second, we bring this operate better into the process of diagnosis. Next, you see that in our work, we do not just ask questions for you to know how to diagnose it. A lot of times you use chemistry. You take the blood and examine the chemical pressure like component inside to see that how this person is functioning in this particular situation to get a much more accurate function. I think the fourth thing here is very simple. It's the idea that different disease simply have different treatment. I'm going to elaborate further. But for instance, depression has totally different treatment from bipolar disorder, particularly they are all considered the same mental disease that can particularly cause by the same effect. I'm not going to take you furthermore. But now we know the situation. First, why this is urgency? Why this harms on people? The fourth thing here is that you are likely to misdiagnose, and this is very difficult. I don't think I need to explain that why on their side. Like self-reflection, a lot of times is not accurate for about the of reason. But what I'm going to explain that even if for the situation that you have talking therapy, professional people doing it, a lot of times it's unprofessional in the way that even if professional, it's hard to diagnose. Why? Simple thing. The fourth thing here is that it's simply hard for you to know that what kind of situation that this person is particularly experiencing. For instance, I make you emotionally down and refuse to talk. For the reason that I'm introvert, I'm feeling a bit sad. I may be also exactly the same reason, but I'm already in serious depression, particularly because I feel disappointed on the work and I fail to feel anything in this particular situation. The element that you refuse to communicate comes from multiple reasons. I think the second here is to say it's hard for you to change. It's hard for you to trust the others unconditionally to open your mind and open your heart. That means that particular process is either going to take a long time, it's impossible, and the effect is going to be limited. But even if that's the case, it's right, we believe you both operate at the same time. I think it simply increases the financial burden as they try to extend to you. But further on, this is the situation that about the most urgent, most important people who are most urgent need is they need the medicine right away and they need a situation right away. A lot of times they fail to have the self-perception of what exactly they have experienced. That's why this is problematic for them. But also thirdly, I believe that this is like different situation you cannot just talk through, but you really need the medicine to control, to stimulate that chemistry. For example, when you are depressed, you need medicine to stimulate the happiness of your brain. When you are having bipolar disorder, you exactly opposite, you need things to oppress it, you are going emotional, extreme from both ends of the time it goes by. And this is something that you really need medicine to do it. Second, why socially acceptable? I don't say several things. The fourth thing here is that people who have mental illness are probably facing a bad environment, are probably get rejected by the around them or family around them. That explains perfectly why they need a huge fear of external recognition to actually for them to process any change if they want to point that any change can be done. That means that only in a situation that is highlight there is a disease on you that it get enough attention and enough serious for you to have the courage instead of just I get a free score on mental health, I'm just simply being overthinking in these particular cases. But secondly, this is also invalidating to mental health. You know that the reason you fail in this test, or you know that the reason that you fail to fulfill the promise, not really because your fault, but really because you have mental disease that makes you significant, incapable of processing it. That is a sense of comfort towards the one who most urgently help in today's debate. Based on all this, proud to oppose.
I think the biggest issue of the speech you just heard is while they talk a lot about biology, they never once consider the fact that there's an entire discipline called psychology, right? I think the issue here is that their side and the ontology that the entire diagnostic approach operates under is this idea that medicines are supposed to be the end-all solution, not simply a tool to actually reach happiness. The ontology under which the medical system and big pharma operates in their world promotes the idea that depression or mental health is completely predetermined and that there's no room for individual agency, which leads to massive amounts of catharsis and makes it really hard for individuals to feel like personal reflection is even valid, let alone necessary in order to overcome mental health problems. And that is exactly why our case is telling you that only our side offers a more holistic and more effective approach to mental health issues. So let's get into this, right? I'm going to build off of my partner's arguments, and I'm going to tell you that adding the transdiagnostic approach is going to be essential because it divorces mental health from the diagnosis medication paradigm and formalizes the idea that there is a role for personal reflection in overcoming mental health issues, even if it's not 100%, right? For a second, I will say, let's not operate in this false dichotomy where it's going to be all biology or all psychology. I think what OG is telling you is that we stand in the middle. It'll be varying from case to case, but it's always going to be both to some degree, and we're the only ones that can actually recognize that and reckon that for every different individual who will have a different diagnostic journey. Okay, so we also believe that this legitimizes the idea that mental health is a continuous range, because in fact it is. It isn't one and done, and it isn't biologically predetermined. You are only predisposed. That is the exact word they use, which does not mean predetermined. So, what we think on our side, though, encourages changing habits, which is going to be really important. It also encourages thought processes and the way you react to things by legitimizing the idea that mental health is in fact a continuous range and it isn't entirely biological or pathological. Moreover, we think that this makes at least a little bit of room for personal responsibility in trying to make yourself happy or overcome the immense struggles or trauma that you experience. Because at the end of the day, there is room for personal agency, and only the individual is actually has the most ability to improve mental health. We also think that mental disorders aren't 100% of the time always imposed from without or preconditioned, like their case seems to assume. We also think that some things can be within your control, and improving mental health requires personal synthesis and recognition of patterns and different life periods and traumatic events. And by synthesizing all these things together through a transdiagnostic approach that looks at different piece-by-piece issues and puts them together, that is the most effective way to actually overcome issues. If you talk to literally anyone that has overcome depression, it isn't because they were medicated their whole lives, it's because they used medication as a tool to reflect on all the things that happened in their life and actually overcome that depression. This case is simply at odds with reality. I'll take back.
The reason you're able to start reflection is because you take the pill and the cold
we have meds
to jump out of the window.
Yeah, so we have meds on our side too. We never get rid of meds. This is simply the rise of personal reflection, the transdiagnostic approach. So meds have best and metric on both sides. We never get rid of them. And I also literally said earlier in my speech, meds are a tool and we should be using them as such. But your side treats them as the end-all be-all solution, which is extremely detrimental to anyone's mental health who takes meds. Contend with that argument. Okay, so mental health is seen as naturalized on their side. It's something that's stuck, it's fixated, it's not dynamic, but our side legitimizes the idea that you can actually do things. Their side basically says your brain is simply prone to depression, but we say that you can in fact be happy. You can in fact reflect, synthesize experiences, and build off of it. Their side precludes the catharsis, or our side specifically tries to preclude the kind of mental health catharsis we see in the status quo, that we see on the opposition side when individuals become heavily medicated and in fact overly reliant on medication via big pharma and the profit incentive that big pharma pushes onto doctors to overprescribe and undertreat and undertherapize. Also, we live in a society where emotions are displaced by this idea of cold hard logic and biological determinism, right? We think that emotions are displaced, and because of that, people don't actually recognize how to regulate their emotions, and only do a transdiagnostic approach where you actually recognize a room for personal improvement or at least change in emotional regulation. Can you actually achieve that kind of regulation? Next, let's get into some of the arguments that you get in the last speech, right? They tell you that we need meds. Closing also says that. Let's take this out real quick. So, in our side, we still have meds, right? Medicines are still really important. But the key difference here is the change in ontology of how medicines are used and a change in the scope of big pharma to dominate medicine. On our side, medicine is seen and used as a tool, and this is really important because it changes the way people perceive medicine. It's no longer just a solution that you need, and once you get Zoloft or mirtazapine, you're fine. No, it's a tool that enables you to go down the long and arduous path of mental health reflection, of synthesizing events, of actually dealing with the trauma and issues in your life that most most people go to at least some degree. Next, they tell you that like it's completely biological. Thomas brought up the POI, PTSD, but we think in any case there's like a degree of a sliding degree between biological and psychological, and we really need to be dealing with the psychology here. We also think they tell you that you can just call friends and family, but this fundamentally is a transdiagnostic approach where you talk about your experiences to someone else and synthesize them. Okay, agency is key. Their logic of predisposition concedes the fundamental logic behind the diagnostic approach, which removes agency, right? We think, like, for example, you can recognize the role of placebo in psychology, or the role of happiness, which tends to A, increase odds of survival with like terminal disease, or B, increase longevity of life. Clearly, that alone means that like survival isn't purely biological and mental health isn't purely biological. There's a psychological, conscious aspect to this too. Then they tell you there's a stigma around mental disease, but that stigma is pushed by their side, where disease is seen as something naturalized that must be solved with medication, instead of as something that everyone experiences to some degree and that requires personal agency. Then they talk about, I can't read my handwriting here. Okay, cool. So, why does OG win this round, right? Let's talk about this idea of big pharma real quick. This argument is really big in Thomas's speech, and I don't think it would refute it. The profit incentive of medicating is self-reinforcing, which means if you don't vote government, on the opposition side, big pharma and this ontology around medication only gets worse over time. On op, mental health becomes more and more about medication, and they become more and more disconnected from emotion and self. But on our side, with the transdiagnostic approach, you change that ontology. Even a rise, even just a mere rise, could lead to an ontological change for at least some individuals, which would improve mental health, which means we fulfill our burden. So at the end of the day, you're voting opening government because we treat mental health for what it really is. A continuous range of experiences and emotions that pretty much everyone goes through, right? Mental health is not something that is stigmatized or like biological or predetermined. It is something that we all have agency to interact with, to fight, to synthesize, to consider, to reflect, and only a transdiagnostic approach that emphasizes personal agency and increases accessibility can do that.
Thank you so much for that speech, and finally,
Opening government tries to make this a debate where GovBench argues that we just have medicine and they have therapy. Here are 3 reasons why it's not mutually exclusive. I'm going to reframe the debate to achieve why we explain the better balance. First, if you read the info slide, it says our side focuses on the treatment of symptoms. It doesn't necessitate that the treatment of these symptoms are medical in nature. For instance, someone with anxiety might have issues feeling like they can't breathe when they are stressed. This means you can teach them things like breathing exercises, or that you should exercise to let off extra steam so that you don't feel the symptoms of your anxiety less. It doesn't mean you have to medicate people completely on our side of the house, though obviously we would still think that that might necessarily be a preferable option, but obviously then don't buy the dichotomy between saying it's one or the other. We obviously think we can necessarily have both. No one is going to give significant medical treatment to someone who just has like little stress. The questions about the people with severe symptoms, and here's how we get it better from our side of the house. There are 2 distinct differences between Gov and OpBench in this motion. The first is the primacy of what treatment you necessarily have to try. On our side of the house, we're more likely to get structures that say you can get the Prozac for your depression first and then do the therapy, because it's about the specific focus of the approach. I don't think either side is going to do away with this, but on the other side of the house, you have to do things like go through a prolonged period of mandated therapy before you're then able to qualify for medicine or get that diagnosis. This is why the stuff that Vincent explained is important, because he tells you why urgency in diagnosis and getting people to alleviate the symptoms first is important. This is the POI that our closing hints at when they say you need the medication to be able to access that tool. Yes, but for people with the most severe mental health issues, oftentimes you feel crippling and devastating symptoms that literally affect your ability to function on a day-to-day basis. For instance, if I have severe anxiety, I will literally pass out during an examination, and there are like 3 to 6 months mandated therapy before I can get medication to deal with those symptoms, causes me irreparable damage. Or for someone who has severe depression and can't get out of bed in the morning, every day that you're unable to get out of bed is a day that you can't bathe, you can't shower, you can't live like a normal human being, you can't go to work, you can't make money. On the other side of the house, when they mandate that you must try everything else under the sun, like exercise and meditation, because you just close your mind and you pray, suddenly you won't feel like there's a dark cloud looming over your life. It's incredibly dehumanizing and invalidating of the symptoms that those individuals have. Even if people on our side of the house get more Prozac than we need to, we don't think there's a specific harm there, because the people who are the worst off, we alleviate the worst harms in the shortest period of time. rise manifests is where more resources are allocated to. Government tries to fiat by saying, if this rise happens, it means the rise is going well and the rise is a good thing. No, that's not necessarily the case. There's a rise of like various things that may not necessarily be good or allocated efficient in society, such as, I don't know, standardized testing for education. It doesn't mean that it's a good metric or it's a metric that's therefore good and therefore it's rising. But what we are now uniquely explaining to you is that this rise uniquely costs states a great deal of resources because you have to spend more on therapists to sit down with people and talk to them about it. Or as Vincent explains, these are voluntary contributions, which means they're limited in number. So even if there is more of a rise than previously, we think it comes at the significant expense of state resources, which limits state capacity to be able to do things like have more of these people just do diagnosis or have more limited discussions with people on that account. That's fundamentally bad because we explain to you why those people are the ones who are significantly worse off. Let's talk about the alternatives that they say when they go, there are underlying causes and there are therefore non-drug related methods like exercise and other things you can necessarily deal with. I want to know that people don't just want to feel bad about themselves and immediately one day wake up and decide that they're depressed. They often reflect, they often try, they often blame themselves because we live in a society that's individualistic and emphasizes personal accountability. For instance, if you do badly on an examination, you will think, perhaps I need to try to breathe more, or perhaps I can plan my time in advance to be less stressed. People will do a whole host of things before they decide to necessarily go to these medical services, which is where the diagnostic portion of this motion therefore necessarily arises. The alternative methods of self-care and self-regulation, like meditation, exercise, eating better, so on and so forth, exist in society apart from this motion because it's the commodification of wellness culture or the rise in trends of people needing to take care of themselves. You see a lot of books on this front, you see a lot of wellness influencers on this, people who say they need to regulate your life in other ways, which means they can't claim this as the benefit of the motion because people would likely have tried both these things on either side of the house anyways. Moving then on, why is the focus on biology important as Vincent explains? I'm not going to sit here and deny that your upbringing and your history indeed does affect the ways in which you are more or less likely to form mental illnesses. They are completely correct. If you go to war, you will feel PTSD. If you have an almond mom, you might necessarily have an eating disorder. But uniquely, when we talk about biology, people's biological permutations affect how they respond to things. That's why someone is a high-performing depressed individual as opposed to not. Or that's why someone's OCD might manifest in one way or another. Or someone's anxiety might manifest in them doing productive things. Or for another person, it's crippling in different regards. They necessarily play out in different ways. These treatments have biological underpinnings. That there are a variety of illnesses that might have similar underlying causes, but they manifest in different ways and therefore need to be medically treated in other ways. For instance, you having depression versus you having OCD versus you having anxiety might all stem from you overthinking, but they play out in the neurons in your brain in different ways that manifest in different symptoms, and therefore we need categories to be able to do that things. For instance, if someone is one type of depressed, you would give them a downer, you would give them an upper type of medicine. Or if someone is anxious, you would give them a downer. There are different ways in which biology plays out, and those categories are therefore important to be able to adjudicate these things. Doing it early is important. They say you can just do it later if you tried the other alternative first, but early diagnosis is important for people to take it seriously. Otherwise, you overthink a bit too much, and then this person spirals, and it's usually difficult for them to be able to come out of it later on. People are unlikely to take these things seriously unless you necessarily give them a label to explain why these things are bad. Before I explain why labels are uniquely liberating, I'll take closing.
Are you more likely to admit that you have depression or that you're on the spectrum?
It doesn't matter what people admit externally, it's what they admit to themselves. So even if people don't want to admit to it externally, what I will say here is that, and you don't have to admit it externally, right? Like other groups, like your employers can ask for your medical records, it's like your parents or immediate family, so you don't have to tell society at large, hey, I'm depressed and I have ADHD. It's about what you and the people around you know and how you therefore necessarily seek treatment in that regard. To that end, labels are liberating. No, we don't tell people their illness, we say you have an illness. It's not, I am anorexic, it's I'm a person with anorexia, and to that end, we don't think people have to associate themselves with their illness because that's how medical health professionals tell these types of things to people. It's important because it explains your experience. It says it's not that I'm a bad friend because I can't get out of bed in the morning, or it's not that I'm a lazy person, therefore I don't do well on exams. It is because I have this thing that uniquely prevents me from being able to function, and to that end, it's liberating for people who otherwise blame themselves. They're more likely to do things like access self-care and support groups. All of these are fundamentally good. The last thing I want to note is that Big Pharma will exist on either side of the house. That's not going anywhere. Medication is important and they have a massive lobby. The question therefore is how we necessarily improve medical research. To improve medical research and get better treatments, i.e. drugs that don't just put people to sleep, you need things like definable populations, you need replicable findings, you need clear outcomes that you can test, you need to be able to do things like drug trial and have clear categories, you need to define the epidemiological issues that come with how these medicines are necessarily created. To that end, we get better medication outside of the house and we provide people the urgency they require.
Alright, thanks for the speech. I never remember the tower.
All across Asia, millions of children are quietly depressed. They do not realize their condition. They refuse to recognize that they are actually mentally ill, and they do not dare tell their parents or their friends or their loved ones about these severe illnesses. The problem is not what opening government identifies, which is that solutions to mental health issues are imperfect and costly. The far greater problem is that across the developing world, people do not seek a solution to begin with because of the stigmatization and gravity associated with mental health conditions. On Closing Government, we're going to explain why you significantly reduce the stigma placed on mental health issues and enable far greater accessibility to mental health care to begin with. Why is there a stigma in the vast majority of countries in the world? Firstly, because of a history of institutionalization, the fact that in the past, mentally ill individuals were forcibly placed into institutions and seen as social outcasts, and that norm perpetuates over time. People still intuitively reject these that are mentally ill. Secondly, the people around you who love you and care about you, and their lives and your lives are strongly intertwined. These people don't want you to become someone that's socially deviant. They don't want something that's unconventional and shocking to be happening to you, right? So when you're telling your parent that I'm feeling depressed or I think I have a particular condition, they think this is a really unfortunate thing that impacts not just you, but also them, the fact that they have to care about you, the fact that the family might bear shame, and that you might be socially less successful. Any large, shocking, negative event that happens to a particular person is just going to be stigmatized against and seen as really bad. The third thing is just that as a society, we have normalized toxic masculinity. The vast majority of countries in the world encourage men to not talk about their feelings, to not talk about their emotions, and recognize their vulnerabilities. The last thing to note is that across the developing world, there is strong anti-Western sentiment and skepticism towards conventional Western medicine, which is why a lot of people think it is big pharmas that are conspiratorial, that are pushing all of the medicine towards people, drugging them, poisoning them, and therefore you should not take medication, and their diagnosis is fake and unprofessional. These are the reasons why millions of people across the developing world reject to confront the fact that they're not feeling well. They do not consider what issues they're plagued with. They do not tell people around them about it. They do not seek any sort of care or interact with mental health discourse because they think, I definitely do not have a mental health issue because that is such a stigmatized situation that I do not want to be placed in. Why do we solve this problem when it's seen as a spectrum, when the solution to this is more cognitive behavioral therapy rather than medication? 4 reasons. Number 1, on our side, the gravity of mental health conditions are far, far lower. That is to say, they defend a binary between having an illness like depression or ADHD or anxiety and not having an illness. Which is why, on their side, people are likely to react to any kind of condition with grief, with alienation, with massive amounts of shock. On our side, it is not a binary. So when you say, I'm mentally ill or I'm feeling depressed, you're not saying, I am diagnosed with severe depression and need medication. You're not creating shock among the people around you, and for that conversation is far easier. The people around you are able to believe this is not a massively unfortunate situation that will impact you and them for the rest of their lives, so you're far more open to talk to them about these situations. The second reason is just that internally to yourself, it's also less intimidating because we give you the belief that you're not ill, you're not powerless, you're just someone who has a particular cognitive pattern that you can't alter. People don't want to admit to themselves that really bad things have happened to them. We give them the opportunity to retain their power and confront their conditions. Thirdly, it is just the fact that on our side, more people will become diagnosed and therefore conditions will become more normalized, right? On their side of the house, there is a high barrier to going to a hospital to begin with because you ask yourself the question of, do I have depression that requires medication? Do I have depression that requires seeing a doctor and getting diagnosed? And oftentimes, people don't think they need that, and so they don't go to the hospital and don't get diagnosed to begin with. On our side, more people get diagnosed when they recognize it as a spectrum and they they can fall on some end of the spectrum. So more people are willing to talk about their mental health conditions, more media portrayal and coverage of mentally ill people exist, and this becomes far more normalized. So the next time people think about a mentally ill friend, the availability bias in their head doesn't lead them to think about the most severe cases of depression they see in medical institutions. Rather, it makes them think about the average person who is just overthinking, or the average person who is just going through a rough patch and who can change this behavior through mindfulness, for example. The final mechanism here is just that we significantly increase the amount of content produced on the internet and social media regarding mental health issues. Firstly, because on our side, when it's a spectrum, everyone's perspective is legitimate, so influencers are less subject to criticism. Secondly, there are also lower barriers to entry to producing that content, because now you don't need a professional medical license to talk about your conditions. You can also engage in things like wellness culture, for example. So on their side of the house, when only people that are medically diagnosed with depression can speak out about these situations, there's far less influencers, far less content on the internet about these issues that normalize these conditions. What the opposition said is, well, there's mild depression and there's severe depression. But the point isn't the name of the condition. The point is any condition that requires you to go to a hospital, be medically diagnosed, and take pills is a condition that will be socially very ostracizing and socially very shocking. Opening government only says disease equals stigma. We thought in their analysis to explain why we remove that stigma on our side of the house. What are the massive impacts flowing from this normalization of mental health issues? Yes.
On your side of the house, Asian children need to admit to themselves and their parents that tiger parenting gave them anxiety. Focusing on underlying causes ascribes blame in even worse ways.
No, we don't have to tell our parents about the cause. Like, the cause doesn't have to be parents abusing us. The cause would be us overthinking, right? The point is we recognize our condition and are more open to having conversations about these things. What are the impacts? Firstly, the more people start interacting with mental health discourse, they start watching these influencers and engaging in these communities, which means over time, they start to enter forums, seek solutions, things like AI therapy or self-help, which are incredibly accessible. The comparatives, they seek no solution on their side, because mental health issues seem so severe, they don't want to identify with that community to begin with. Secondly, on our side, more people are just brave enough to recognize their issues and their conditions, so they seek some solution versus no solution on their side. These are the most vulnerable people, right? Top half talks about which solution is better. We say we give a lot of people who would not access solution on their side of the house some solution on our side of the house. Thirdly, they say this costs resources, but we just increase funding for mental health issues and attention directed towards mental health issues. So we generate more resources. When more people realize that mental health issues are severe, more people become therapists and become physicians that specialize in these issues. Finally, mental health illness patients just face less stigma and less alienation on our side of the house. We are also more robust to opening all these responses. The debate is not about medication, it is about how you view mental health, and we provide you the far more preferable view that allows more people to opt into the community to begin with.
Alright, thank you so much for that speech. Remember, covered mental health, mental health.
We do not have a problem with more people being properly diagnosed with mental health issues. What we have a problem with is the trivialization of these mental health diagnoses. According to CO, less professional licensing is a good thing because more influencers mean there's more promotion of these mental health issues, and friends and family won't believe you have a mental health issue. Rather, they think that you're just a person who's overthinking, that you can use your own mindfulness to somehow solve this issue. And this is precisely the issue that closing government is proposing. They're proposing an extension of the severe social impacts brought by this diagnosis of mental health issues. So what does this rise of transdiagnosis approach look like? Just as CG has said, this is likely going to look like a significant rise in social media approaches. This looks like TikTok influencers or Instagram influencers proposing somehow wellness culture and saying that if you have ABC symptoms, you have ABC like mental health issues. This looks like Google Forms, AI chatbots helping you with diagnosing your mental health issues and saying that if you have a chat with like this particular AI mental health machine, somehow you're able to relieve all your like mental health neurological differences in your brain that makes it hard for you to connect socially or have an optimistic brain to continue with your life and socialize with your family and friends. So why is this trivialization of this transdiagnosis so extremely harmful? This is because it's basically creating a new social atmosphere that, yes, while it's more tolerating to mental health issues on the surface, is actually a trivialization of mental health issues and falsely treating people who don't actually have serious mental health issues as those who have mental issues. So it's not the increasing prevalence of the right people getting diagnosed. It's basically twisting what the actual mental health issues are like and basically not providing sufficient help for those people who actually have serious mental health issues, as people believe it is a trivial issue and something that can be solved with fixing your brain simply. Yes, sure.
Yeah, we totally agree. People are being falsely diagnosed, right? Engage with the idea that pharmaceuticals and insurance companies are incentivized to give doctors and have doctors overprescribe people.
Commercialization happens on both sides, so to wash at best, because wellness culture, you promote tea, you promote yoga, you promote fitness programs, diet programs. We argue that this is a more accessible form of approach that's more appealing through marketing and social media, which causes more and more trivialization, which is the problem that we are trying to address. So why is this trivialization so bad? Is that for the people who are diagnosed with these mental health issues, with serious mental health issues, what will happen is that you actually have a serious mental health issue, but what you're told is that you have a degree of anger spectrum, you have a degree of anxiety spectrum, you have a degree of depression symptoms. But these people will, first of all, simply get overwhelmed because they don't actually know what their problem is. They feel like there's an endless amount of problems that they don't really know how to fix. So there will be a lot of self-doubt, and it's easy to get unconfident of themselves and unsure because they feel like they carry such a heavy burden, being faced with so many issues that they have anger, they have anxiety, they have depression, and they don't know how to treat them. On our hand, while they may get overwhelmed with the shock of being treated with severe depression, at least they know that what they have is a concrete issue, and this medication will at least make them in the right physical space, as our opening government has said, to start rewiring those neurological focuses, to start interacting more, to actually have the mental headspace to be able to do that. So we believe that having a concrete diagnosis and being able to take concrete medication is essential. And we provided an extension that if the government side wants to say that you can just take medications for all three diagnoses or all of the spectrums diagnosis, this is simply wrong because physically, we cannot take too many chemicals or it will just overwhelm our nervous system and overwhelm our physical system, just like you cannot take multiple vaccines or multiple medications and this will overwhelm your body.
Of course.
And the second one is that these people with mental health problems are likely going to be more pessimistic in and of itself. So for example, people with depression, they are already likely to be in a very bad mental health state. When you tell them that you don't really know what your specific problem is or you have a variety of issues, they're more likely to get overwhelmed, as you have said. And the second important point is that some people with no mental health problems who have been diagnosed with mental health problems on a variety spectrum that is quite abstract, first of all, they're likely to have self-doubt because once they're told by a supposedly very authentic form, such as AI Trust Health Initiative, they're likely going to think that they actually have mental health problems. And this is bad because firstly, they're likely going to try to find therapy or try to talk with their friends saying they have a therapy issue. So this is going to hoard therapy resources and medication in the first place. If they take medication, this is going to be even worse because they don't really have the licensing from a doctor to do so, and they just buy the medication from a pharmaceutical store, which might cause neurological impacts that are not actually suited to their condition. And secondly, that will simply flush out the significance of actual mental health issues. And this is a huge problem because with the trivialization of mental health issues, and with everybody having a friend that says, oh, I actually have a spectrum of disorder, I actually have a spectrum of anxiety, people will think that anxiety and depression, there aren't actually serious issues. I have no time. They'll actually think they're serious issues, and they actually think that it's this person's just not in a correct headspace. They're only having depression because they failed their exam, or they had a really bad day at the office, so they have an anger spectrum. So this actually decreases a lot of the help to the people who actually have mental health diagnosis because people feel like it's less significant of an issue. So this looks like there's less public aid, for example, in schools, where a lot of people with mental health issues may need help with like writing or help with like not being in crowded rooms. Teachers and staff may invalidate this because they think that people with mental health issue is simply their brain not functioning properly rather than a physical issue. So this means that they might not provide the support in the environment that they necessarily need to survive and adapt based on their unique circumstances. This also looks like family members and friends not seriously taking their son's issue into account or their friend's issue into account. This looks like they're less likely going to be pushed to get actual help when they tell their family members something's like wrong or like I feel really bad, because people think a lot of people have experienced this in online forums, and TikTok forums are not any different.
Thank you so much for that speech, Member Robinson.
The moment when CEO tries to propose the harms of trivializing the issue that people are not going to care that much about mental health is going to be seen as something which is very normal and people wouldn't care that much, is the moment which they concede our benefit that just by making this a trans form of diagnosis, this allows people to be much more accepting, this allows for society to understand about the issue much more. I will first reframe why exactly people are scared of the mental issue without the idea of transdiagnosis, and then I'll explain why exactly it's still better and way over the other houses. Firstly then, I think it's important to understand that first is that the access to knowledge is one that is inherently low, because people do not know what exactly is the reasons of what these symptoms are. Everything is being conveniently put under the umbrella of depression, of anxiety, but people do not actually understand what are the chemical reactions or what exactly are the reasons that happen. I think that it's quite clear on the open exchange that nobody actually knows why actually these things actually happen, and I feel like just by trivializing the issue and allowing for people to know and accept this much better is one that already allows for a lower barrier of entry for people to actually care about the issue. Secondly then, is that people do not want to face the issue that they have mental illnesses because of two reasons. A, the label of mental health is one that is especially seen as a taboo, but B, is that people are just not sure whether or not they have these kind of mental issues, and especially people do not want to undergo these kind of large amount of treatments because it's a burden, but people also do not want to constantly face the stigmatization which is not solved on our bench as a whole. These reasons then prove to you, Judge, that people just are too afraid to engage with the idea of mental illnesses without the idea of just transdiagnosis and allowing for people to believe that these things are normal. I think the comparative that you ought to believe at this point of this debate is that comparing the benches over closing opposition, we at least prove to you that people have some form of ability to enter the spectrum or enter the community of mental illnesses and be much more accepting because the entry point is lower. You do not need a medical certificate from a doctor to prove that you are a depressed individual or you have actual mental illnesses for you to be able to talk and resonate with people with actual mental illnesses. Just by you probably thinking that you're overthinking already creates a sense of belonging, which allows for a larger group and a larger magnitude of people that is able to congregate together and actually bring much more attention towards this issue. But why is it still that people are able to care more about this compared to what they're trying to persuade you into believing this? Firstly, on the question of whether or not that people actually care, I think that the comparative is that they tell you that schools are not going to care about mental illnesses, but the problem, Judge, is that right now schools don't even give a damn about mental illnesses right now because they don't even think that this is a thing that actually exists. By having people believe that overthinking, by having people thinking that a lot of stress because of homework, because of parents is the reason of mental illnesses, it's much more likely that people are at least able to speak up. Note that, Judge, our path to victory is not contingent on solving mental illness as a whole, but in so far people are much more likely to accept mental illnesses, people are much more likely to see this as a trivial issue. This means that people with actual mental disorders are able to better find some form of belonging and actually feel some form of consolation in society, which they would not feel like they are being alienized or being ostracized as a whole, which then necessarily is going to worsen the condition. Secondly then, weighing on the question about pharmaceutical companies, which is a deadlock which I don't see is broken up to this point of this debate. I think that OG tries to give you this idea that pharmaceutical companies make things which are very, very expensive. The first reason that we're going to prove that this is what we're doing is better is because we prove to you that it's not just a question about what solution is better, which is the death of an opening half, but we just prove to you that people are able to undertaking these solutions at the first place. This proves that, Judge, this is a prerequisite for their benefits to manifest. So if the benefits of opening half is true, that probably going to see a doctor is true, the way that they're going to access their benefits is for people to at least first believe that this thing exists as a whole, or at least have some form of inclination to at least join the community and actually understand more about what exactly are the illnesses that they are, instead of just rejecting. But the comparative is quite simple. Why exactly then we are still okay with things like influencers not having licenses and promoting? Why is this justified? 3 reasons. A, it's because influencers do not prescribe medications. This means that we're giving you advice on wellnesses, on treatments, but these things at best probably is a placebo effect. Probably it might work, but probably it would not work. And in so far you're not injecting chemicals into your body, there's no tangible harm which is being inflicted into the patient. This means that it's okay even if these medications are not necessarily true. Secondly then, it's because these things are considerably less expensive, which means the cost that you're putting into believing these influences, like going to exercise, going to deep breathing, doesn't necessarily need you to have a large amount of capital to then enter. But thirdly then, the opt-out cost is lower because just by doing deep breathing exercise, just by doing, I don't know, running or brisk walking, you are able to opt out at any time. Compared to you actually taking medicine from the pharmaceutical companies, you cannot just decide to stop taking medicines whenever you like. This proves that then, Judge, at least we allow for A, some form of ability, some form of possibility that people are able to solve the problems that they are feeling, but B, the likelihood and the certainty that people are at least able to find some form of belonging and also be heard in the community. But before I go on, I'll say one more opening.
My explanation on why prop system is very resource intensive to scale and sustain means that people on your side, even if they realize they have a problem, can't get actual treatment, and is logically prior to CEO's claim on crowding out sick people from systems.
I think firstly, on both houses it's equally expensive, but at least we allow people to at least recognize the problem. This means that even if they don't go through the very expensive form of treatment, they don't go through the best version of treatment as you would like to claim, at least people are going through some form of treatment and they know at least what is happening. So even if they don't go through any form of treatment, mental illness is not the one that just directly stems from a pharmaceutical condition, but it's something which also directly correlates with how you live your life, because there's some form of truth in it which you are able to be happy, you are able to be surrounded by support groups and whatnot, which allows for a happier society as a whole. But finally then, to deal with opening opposition, I think the main claim here comes in 2 folds. A is on urgency, and why exactly people will be able to get treatment faster or slower. I think again, the willingness to accept treatment is the first step for people to be able to accept treatment. So even if you are able to ensure for better treatment on your house, what the most important part here is that we are allowing for a validation of the symptoms instead of what people are trying to claim that, oh, you are probably seen as an odd one out, or you're probably seen as someone who is clinically severely ill. Because of the reasons that we allow people to open up, B, we allow for people to be in contact about issues of mental health, and C, at least people are trying to seek some kind of treatment. The willingness for you to at least try to be inclined to some form of treatment allows the treatment to better work with you, or even have the chance for you to at least learn more about the subject and help people around you. The way here is quite simple, is that even if you are getting some form of treatment, or even if you are just getting some form of venting out, it's still better than having to having this great solution, but nobody can get access towards this. Finally then, on the quality of treatment, I think R&D is the main part of how almost case is going to work, but R&D can only happen if people are going to see the different colors on the spectrum of how exactly mental health works, and allows for the largest amount of data collection, which allows for best form of treatment to then be accessed for the individual.
irony here. I have no auditory issues, so please don't worry with POID. People who have played against me for lying down noses. So you can either raise your hand or stand up. I promise I will call on you. I'm not going to leave you standing for 5 minutes. I'm not going to that. Also, very quickly before my speech, I have gone through a lot of mental health problems. If I use examples, it's not meant to generalize or target any specific